Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good Tuesday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder with you on this 1st of July, 2014. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your latest weather information any way you like by going to weather.gov/Alaska or arh.noaa.gov is an alternate website there. The weather info line is open at 800-472-0391. Listen to your NOAA Weather Radio or find information on Twitter, on Facebook, or on YouTube during the day. After this show, of course, through our broadcast partner at KAKM and Alaska Public, you can go to AKWX TV on the search bar on YouTube and find this entire broadcast there. So thanks for watching and getting your information that way. Tonight's hazardous weather includes flooding across the interior and the potential for more. Look for flood warnings there across eastern parts of the interior through the Tanana Valley, the Deltana and Tanana Flats region, the eastern Alaska region. All these areas under flood warnings there for the Salcha and the Upper Chena rivers. Many locations there have seen at least an inch to an inch and a half of rain in the last day or so, and some places could see another 1 to maybe as much as 2 inches of rain. The Denali National Park area is under a flood advisory. Those areas have seen at least an inch or so of rain. Most areas have seen an excessive amount of rain already this season alone, so the ground is already very saturated, and any additional rain, even certainly heavy rain, is compounding the problem there. So a flood advisory there for area streams and rivers. And also across the Birch Creek region, another 1 to 2 inches of rain expected in that area. So a flood advisory for the Birch Creek area in the Yukon Flats. So flood potential remains high. The number one rule you should remember is turn around, don't drown. If you come across a flooded stream or riverway that you normally cross, but this time looks like there's a little bit more water on it than normal, it's a good idea to just put it off and wait till the water recedes. The rivers come up and down around Alaska fairly quickly most of the time. And with that, a few hours of your life could mean the rest of your life there. So certainly just put off the crossing there for a little bit of time and be smart about it. Again, turn around, don't drown. The easy way to remember that life-saving situation. Fire danger, obviously, across the interior and south central has dramatically improved in the last couple of weeks. One area of maybe a little bit of concern would be across the Seward Peninsula, where fire danger remains somewhat high across the interior of the peninsula itself. Other than that, fire danger is low to moderate across just about the rest of the 49th state. Looking at across the west, across the North Pacific and the Bering Sea, you can see the stream of Pacific moisture coming off the subtropical regions out of eastern Asia being pulled into areas of low pressure, one of those situated just south of the eastern chain. That moisture is wrapping into low pressure that will likely take a curve into the Gulf and not ever make it into south central Alaska or the northern Gulf at this point. You can also see more of a south and westerly direction across a good chunk of the central and eastern Bering Sea. That southerly flow should continue as we head into the rest of the week, but today it produced enough low clouds and stratus across some of the northern YK Delta that it locked in temperatures in the 40s and 50s for a good part of the afternoon. While on the other side of the Killbucks, temperatures were soaring into the 60s and 70s. Quite a remarkable difference there. Looking at the rest of the state with a visible satellite picture, more of a true snapshot of what the clouds really look like from space, looking down on Alaska. You can see clouds are back over southeast. Some of those were breaking up with a little bit of daytime heating. Clouds across the north and western Gulf were sparse across coastal areas, and we look like we're seeing some improving conditions across south central with a threat of rain a little bit further north. Rain was certainly present across areas in the interior today. You can see the much thicker, bright white clouds across Fairbanks and the Tanana Valley and northward there, where showers and thunderstorms were noted. Areas around Fairbanks today picked up nearly an inch of precipitation. Out around Gulkana, the precipitation totaled closer to an 8/10 there. And Nome also saw 2/10 of an inch, and about the same there around Valdez today. So we know an awful lot of water is falling across the interior, and of course the next step is it's going to run off into places like the Salcha and the Upper Chena River. So again, those areas under flood warnings and flood advisories for the interior. If you have any questions about what kind of warning you're on, are under or advisory you're under, certainly listen to your NOAA Weather Radio or check online at weather.gov/Fairbanks for those flood advisories. Here's another look at that visible satellite picture. You can see clouds breaking up across some of the interior and then filling back in with the heating of the day. Clouds are also moving in from east to west across the areas north of the Yukon. Some of that, again, did include thunder and lightning there. That will likely continue into the evening hours and be back again tomorrow. The surface chart today shows a wave of low pressure across the eastern Gulf. It's mainly south and west of Haida Gwaii. It's slowly lifting northward, but what will win out the Gulf, it looks like in the coming days, will be a growing ridge of high pressure. As that strengthens, more areas will be in a little bit hotter weather as we go through the mid and probably late week. The best chance for showers and thunderstorms in the coming days will gradually lift northward of the Alaska Range, probably along the range from time to time. But any substantial wet weather will likely stay out of south central and southwestern Alaska. And as I mentioned, the storm here across the North Pacific will just graze the Aleutians as it's moving eastward and then start to drop southward once again. You can see a few showers developing across southern parts of southeast tonight, and maybe a few areas around the Wrangell-St. Elias. The best chance for substantial precipitation that will be north of the Alaska Range once again for the Salcha and the Chena Rivers, and probably around the Birch Creek area as well. Some areas, as mentioned, probably 1 to 2 inches of rain on top of what you've already seen. The northwestern coast also looking at some light rainfall there for the Seward Peninsula and the Chukchi Sea. Notice way out there across eastern Siberia, another wave of cold airs trying to get organized. Doesn't really seem to have a whole lot of punch just yet, but we're going to keep an eye on that. West of Haida Gwaii, a 1,004 millibar low there is creeping northward. Again, it's running into an awful lot of dry air here across the central and eastern Gulf, but it is pushing moisture northward. So southeast, your showers tonight will probably fill into more of a light rain or maybe a more consistent showery type situation if it doesn't completely fill in as we get into Wednesday and Thursday. Showers and thunderstorms will be a little more prevalent north of the Alaska Range again, and you'll have a better chance of that thunder and lightning, it looks like, as we get into Wednesday. Trough of low pressure just south of the eastern Brooks Range and sitting right along the Yukon will focus some of the heavier rainfall, maybe a little bit further west than what we've seen today. Low pressure across the northern Pacific at 999 millibars, again starting to show that slow shift to the south and east, running into high pressure here. So it's not going to just cut through this, it's going to have to drop south, and that's what we expect it to do as we get into Thursday. You can see it slowly disappearing from the map there. Now by Thursday afternoon, looking out across the west and eastern Siberia, west of the Bering Strait, you've got warmer air building in once again. Another surge of warm air trying to move off the Kamchatka Peninsula. This, again, is going to run into a more stable zone of high pressure, which will likely produce fog across the eastern Bering, places like Bristol Bay, and maybe around the Alaska Peninsula. Meanwhile, that high pressure system is breaking up clouds across the lower and middle Yukon and also helping to dry things out across south central and southwestern Alaska, including Kodiak Island. So look for more sunshine there. Any risk of showers will primarily be confined to areas in the higher terrain, mainly the Alaska Range itself, perhaps some areas around the Talkeetnas, but chances are even further north than that. Up around the Brooks Range and north of the Yukon, a better chance for showers and storms there than any part of the interior, it looks like at this point. And for southeast, your rain continues to fill in as we go through Wednesday and into Thursday at this point, with low pressure just south and west of Sitka at 1,011 millibars. Here's a look at temperatures today, and one note here. I apologize, some of these haven't been filling in the last couple days, or certainly today. So in southeast, we have kind of a hit and miss area of temperatures plotted for you today. Temps around the lower 60s for Juneau, a little bit further south, readings in the low to mid 60s there as well after a decent amount of rainfall. Across south central today, Valdez did see temperatures in the upper 50s, around 60 in Cordova, 55 in Middleton Island. The Kenai Peninsula in the upper 50s, 66 around Anchorage this afternoon, 55 around Kodiak. Denali National Park, closer to 51 degrees, that reading out of Healy, 52 in Greeley, and 57 in Fairbanks, again after a soggy afternoon with nearly an inch of rain. 65 in Eagle. Looking further northward, Fort Yukon at 64. The Arctic coast saw temperatures anywhere from 48 in Barrow to 40 in Kaktovik, 57 around Prudhoe Bay and Deadhorse, and 40s and 50s for the Chukchi Seacoast Wainwright. Considerably warmer there at 65. Kotzebue Sound temps in the lower to mid 50s. Nome was showing 46 again after another soggy day. Grayling only 63 degrees. Looked like Cooper Bay and Nunivak Island saw temps in the low to mid 50s today. St. Lawrence Island at 46, McGrath 67, and areas a little bit further south and west in the lower 60s around Bristol Bay. 50s for a large part of the Alaska Peninsula, including Sand Point at 55. Again, about the same there in Kodiak. The Pribilofs only in the mid-40s. And Shemya, a little bit warmer than everyone else in the chain, about 50 degrees. Overnight low temperatures will primarily hover in the upper 40s and low 50s for the interior. The southwest coast, especially the YK, looking at temps in the lower 40s. So some cooler weather there, and for Norton Sound. Unalakleet only about 48 degrees, 44 in Nome. The Arctic coast will hover at or just above the freezing point today. Wainwright around 32 degrees tonight, 35 Kaktovik. 40s and 50s for southeast, 50 in Kodiak Island, closer to 50 in south central, and the chain in the upper 40s with highs tomorrow a little bit milder, about 50 degrees or so. St. Paul is expecting 48, 51 in Nunivak Island. Southwest could see temps soar into the lower 70s. Lake Iliamna about 74 degrees there, 71 in Kodiak. The heat is on in south central, and parts of Prince William Sound could make it into the lower 70s at least. Mid to upper 60s for a good part of southeast, even as showers are filling in a little bit more for you. 61 in Fort Yukon, 30s and 40s for the Arctic coast, and 47 in Nome, with Kotzebue looking at temps closer to 50 degrees. Well, flying weather will be a little bit touch and go across the interior with more rain and storms there, but chances are north of the Alaska Range you might tap MVFR conditions from time to time, but south of it, it looks to be VFR all the way as we get into your Wednesday and Thursday. MVFR conditions will flirt with southeastern Alaska tomorrow, and your best chance of IFR conditions will be north of the Bering Strait, south of the Seward Peninsula through Nunivak Island, and just off the YK coast. And a good part of the chain likely under IFR conditions through tomorrow afternoon. Here's your pass conditions then. Anaktuvik Pass and Adigan Pass likely VFR conditions. Now as we go into the rest of the week, that could change a little bit, especially if you get a better chance of showers and storms in your area. Tomorrow there is a risk of thunderstorms in those passes. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, we expect to be VFR through most of your Wednesday. Same goes for Rainy Pass. Windy Pass will start out at MVFR, but transition toward improving ceilings there. Isabel Pass also expected to see improvement there through visibility and ceilings up to VFR by the afternoon. Mentasta Pass also expects to see some improvements there. Tanita Pass, we see VFR conditions by the afternoon developing. Portage Pass should also see some improvements. Any restrictions will likely be on the eastern side in Prince William Sound. And for freezing levels, you'll notice that warm air has invaded the Yukon. No wonder we've got thunderstorms that pop up every day there, but some of those have been working their way in to the central interior. The coldest air right now up across the Bering Strait at 6,000 feet for the freezing level, the surface freezing line right across the Arctic coast in northern parts of Alaska, and much warmer weather situated across the central and eastern chain and out across the west, with freezing levels there around 10,000 feet. What about icing potential? You have to climb pretty high up there, above 7,000 feet across the northwest coast and Kotzebue Sound to find some light to isolated moderate. Right now, I don't see a whole lot of threat over land and out across the southern tip of the Alaska Peninsula and the chain above 11,000 to below 17,000 for some light to isolated moderate icing threats there. The jet stream shows low pressure across the eastern Gulf, dragging air off the continent and then back over land. The wind speeds coming in from north to south across the western Gulf at 95 knots or so. Another trough located across the Bering Strait and western Alaska with wind speeds there at around 30,000 feet to about 60 knots or so. The main core of the jet well south of Alaska at this point, with 120 knot winds crossing the central Pacific and working toward the west coast quickly. A ridge of high pressure also building across the western United States at this time. Low pressure west of Haida Gwaii at 9,000 feet shows the developing high pressure system south of Kodiak Island there. This is helping to develop that drier air moving into the Gulf that we saw on satellite just a while ago. Low pressure across the central Aleutians, also pushing in more of a southerly flow for the central and eastern chain. And there's our southerly winds we also saw on the Bering Sea satellite picture there. Those southerlies blowing around 20 to 25 knots all the way up the west coast to the Arctic coast, reaching Barrow around 25 knots. At 3,000 feet, very light winds across the interior, if wind at all. High pressure is trying to gain ground there very quickly. Wind speeds are picking up a little bit more from the east, from Kaktovik toward Barrow at 10 to 25 knots. And there's our low pressure system that we saw on the surface chart in the northern Pacific. Wind speeds anywhere from 25 to about 35 knots, crossing over Dutch Harbor, Nikolsky. Again, relatively light fashion there from the south and southeast. Wind speeds across the YK around 10 to 15 knots. And once again, those winds coming in through the interior are very light. Some stronger winds there across the southern parts of southeast, 20 to 25 knots for tomorrow. Here's a look at turbulence potential. If there's any chop, it'll probably be across the southern parts of southeast and the bays and passes there. Also across the Aleutians, mainly working very close to the frontal boundary in place, generally below 5,000 feet, and about the same there for the Arctic coast, mainly around the Beaufort Seacoast east of Barrow toward Kaktovik. You might find some light to isolated moderate in those areas. That's a look at your aviation forecast for your Wednesday. I'll be back in just a few minutes with your marine weather. Stay tuned.
The beauty and tranquility of our rivers provide the setting for numerous outdoor activities, from fishing on a lazy afternoon to facing the thrilling challenge of whitewater rapids. However, we must never underestimate the tremendous force of moving water, which can quickly turn harmless fun into a fight for your life. The hazard of drowning can appear suddenly and in many forms. It occurs in metropolitan areas and in isolated rural locations, such as canyons, arroyos, whitewater locations, caves, and even storm drains. Some of the most popular vacation spots in the western and southwestern United States are canyons. Each year, thousands of campers, hikers, and other outdoor enthusiasts explore the narrow valleys and gorges found in canyons. However, when raging floodwaters roar through these narrow channels, these popular spots can become death traps.
First came the lawn furniture, and then came the live gas tanks off of campers and stuff, and then came the saw logs and the wood piles, and then came the cars and the trucks and the campers, and cars had lights on them and the people in them, and the lights are still on them. There was people in them, and you couldn't even get close to this because of all the debris coming down.
There's no way to help any of them.
No way, no way. And you couldn't even hear them scream, thank God, because the roar was so bad.
A flood is an overflow of water onto normally dry land. Flooding is long-term, lasting for days or weeks. A flash flood is caused by heavy rainfall in a short period of time, generally less than 6 hours. Flash floods can develop quickly when you least expect it. They can form from intense thunderstorms at the upper end of a canyon, sometimes many miles away. Although you may be in the lower end of the canyon, enjoying sunny skies, danger could be racing toward you at that very moment. Flash floods in canyons are so localized and powerful, they carry boulders, rocks, trees, and anything else in their path. People don't just drown in these kinds of flash floods. They are also beaten to death by the moving debris. Visitors to popular spots like Zion National Park and other canyons need to be constantly aware of changing weather conditions to ensure a safe outing. To alert people of current and potential danger, the National Weather Service monitors our current river conditions and issues official flood and flash flood watches and warnings. Keep abreast of current weather conditions before entering and while visiting a canyon. An arroyo is a flat-bottomed, normally dry stream bed forming a channel, usually found in the semi-arid western United States. They can be many miles long. Most often in the summer months, warm, moist tropical air masses produce strong thunderstorms with intense rainfall. Arroyos become hazards when rain falls too quickly to be absorbed by the hardened desert ground and quickly runs through the usually dry channels. When this happens, a dry arroyo can quickly become a raging river. Some people choose to camp in the flat, dry arroyo bed. However, rainwater channeled into an arroyo can come from thunderstorms occurring miles away, leaving campers unaware they are in the direct path of a deadly wall of racing water. Vehicles are especially prone to hidden danger in areas where roads without bridges dip across these normally dry creek beds. Be especially careful when in or near an arroyo, wash, or low water crossing. Never drive through flooded roads or washes. You can lose control of your car in as little as 6 inches of water, and 2 feet of water can carry your car away. In recent years, whitewater rafting has become a popular adventure sport. Riding the swirling waters or navigating around standing waves are exciting ways to enjoy the outdoors. There are dangers associated with fast-moving water, but with a little common sense, rafters and kayakers can enjoy a safe day on the river. Swollen rivers from rain, melting snow, or scheduled dam releases can provide for exciting whitewater rides. Increased river heights produce a faster, more powerful flow. Rafters need to know current river conditions to avoid potential mishaps. Usually, it is the novice adventurer without professional guidance who gets into trouble.
Last weekend, when 3 river rafters went over the edge, sucked into water churning so furiously, it ripped off one of the rafters' life jackets.
It's the pressure, tons and tons of water pushing against a human being. The tons of water usually always win.
There's a lot of big waves. There's also the cold water, hypothermia is a big factor too.
It's good, exciting flow right now. You just gotta run it safely and you shouldn't have any problems.
Depending on weather conditions, water levels vary throughout the year, making certain times better for rafting than others. The character of a river may change depending on the height of the river and shape of the channel.
And the situation in the central and eastern interior is one to keep an eye on again for flooding. Remember the words, turn around, don't drown. It could certainly save your life. Across southeast now, as we look at the marine forecast, northerlies blowing out of the Lynn Canal around 15 knots with a 3-foot sea. More of an east to westerly flow crossing through Frederick Sound and Stevens Passage. 3-foot seas are expected there, and 2 to 4-foot seas across some of the southern inner waterways with a 20-knot wind from the south and east. Now around coastal areas, more of a north and westerly flow will be blowing relatively lightly at about 10 to 15 knots. We have an opposing southeasterly flow, though, out of the Dixon entrance and offshore of Craig. 10-knot winds there with a 5-foot sea expected for Wednesday. A little bit of a shift as we get into Thursday. More offshore winds are blowing through more areas, and east to westerly flow there south of Sitka with a 5-foot sea on 15-knot winds from east to west. The southerlies are moving up the coast from Gustavus and out toward Yakutat at 10 knots with a 4-foot sea there. We'll keep southerlies across the Lynn Canal, 10 knots with a 2-foot sea, northeasterlies through the central inner waterways, and we'll hold on to our southeasterly flow across the southern inner channels there at 20 knots with a 4-foot sea. For south central, look for more of a west and northwesterly flow to be predominant in more areas in Prince William Sound and outside of Prince William Sound, about 10 to 15 knots from the west and northwest. A variable flow south of the Resurrection area at 10 knots with a 4-foot sea. And out of the Barrens, a west and northwesterly flow crossing through 15 to 20 knots with the flow picking up in the western Gulf, and eastern Kodiak Island looking at 20 knots with a 5-foot sea. Shelikof Strait, more of a southwesterly flow running into that opposing northwesterly wind there just west of the Barrens, and winds will be pretty light up and down the Cook Inlet, around 10 knots with 2-foot seas as you head up toward Anchorage. A south and westerly flow will continue across Cook Inlet and the Shelikof Strait region tomorrow and into Thursday. Variable flow and light winds across the north and western Gulf. Inside Prince William Sound, it looks just fine. Westerly flow on the eastern side of Kodiak Island as well, 15 knots with a 4-foot sea. Across the Alaska Peninsula, 15-knot winds in the North Pacific there with 4 to 6-foot seas. A variable flow north of Kodiak or Cold Bay and more of a westerly wind inside of Bristol Bay, 20 knots with a 3-foot sea, and you'll see that diminish somewhat as we get into Thursday with 4-foot seas and 15-knot winds. A variable flow south and west of Kodiak Island and east of Chignik, around Sand Point and south into the North Pacific, a 15-knot wind coming in from the south and east with a 7-foot sea. Across the chain, look for a 20 to 25-knot winds in most areas. South and easterly flow around Unalaska on either side You'll notice that picks up to more of an easterly wind at 25 knots from 4 to 7 foot seas on the Bering side and 11 foot seas on the Pacific side, with northeasterlies for the west and central chain blowing in from the north and east, 20 knots with 6 to 8 foot seas. That switches course and comes around to the west and northwest with 5 to 6 foot seas there on Thursday. We'll hold on to the easterly winds wrapping around low pressure in the North Pacific as that moves eastward. Look for these winds to shift around a little bit more as we get into Friday, but they're already diminishing across the Bering, 15 to 20 knots on Thursday and holding around 25 knots for the Pacific, with seas running around 8 to 10 feet on Thursday. For the west coast, a south and westerly wind wrapping around high pressure, a variable flow outside of Kuskokwim Bay, southeasterlies for the Pribilofs, and wind speeds in the North Bering running around 15 knots. 4 to 5 foot seas are expected there. Those seas diminish somewhat on Thursday. A variable flow north of Nunivak Island, southwesterlies around St. Lawrence Island at 15 knots, and an easterly flow crosses the Pribilofs at 15 knots with a 4-foot sea. Across the North Slope, easterlies coming across from Kaktovik to Barrow around 15 knots over ice that is diminishing rapidly. A southerly flow up out of the Bering Strait, 15 knots there with a 4-foot sea from Shishmaref to Point Hope and Cape Lisburne. And those southerlies will pick up a little bit more as we head into Thursday. 20 knots with 4 to 5 foot seas there. Southwesterlies north of Point Lay, 2-foot seas, and again continuing on that light wind. An opposing easterly flow north of Barrow at 15 knots, and those 15-knot winds will continue for Prudhoe Bay, Dead Horse, and Kaktovik as well for Thursday afternoon. Recapping tonight's weather, heavy rain continues across the central and eastern interior for the Tanana valleys. However, flood warnings are in effect for the Upper Chena and Salter rivers, as well as the Birch Creek region at a flood advisory right now, and a flood advisory is also in effect for the Denali National Park region. If you're in those areas, you need to pay special attention when you're crossing riverways or streams. If they look like they're extra swollen and you can't see the roadway, it's a good time to turn around, don't drown. Now remember that flood safety phrase, as you could be looking at excessive runoff in the next 24 hours in some cases there, another 1 to 2 inches of rain in some of the heavier locations on top of already saturated ground and already swollen streams and rivers. Across the eastern parts of the Gulf, low pressure is lurking just south and west of Haida Gwaii. This will creep northward and help to fill in the showers that you see tonight, mainly across the southern parts of southeast. A front and storm sitting just across the North Pacific, grazing the Aleutians, will continue moving eastward and then drop southward quickly as it runs into high pressure. Showers will focus more on the interior in the coming days and south central as high pressure develops across the region. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.